Hello dear viewers, this is George from Ireland. In this video I shall be elucidating my belief that Poland's new Holocaust complicity law ought to be opposed. First of all, what is this new law? Well, the Polish Parliament has just passed a piece of legislation saying that from now on it will be a crime punishable by up to 3 years of incarceration to suggest that the Polish nation or state participated in the Holocaust or indeed was complicit therein. So what was the Holocaust? You probably know, from about 1942 to 1945, the Third Reich made a concerted effort to annihilate the Jewish community in Europe, and there were several other groups. They victimized homosexuals, Jehovah's Witnesses, I could go on, various political dissidents, Freemasons, and indeed civilians in occupied countries like Poland were killed in their millions by the Third Reich, deliberately killed. So now, it's true that some Polish citizens demonstrated utter heroism in saving their Jewish fellow Polish citizens from the Holocaust. However, there were some Poles who did take part in the Holocaust. In fairness, that is acknowledged by the Polish Parliament. So why do I oppose this piece of legislation? Well, several reasons. I generally don't like, how to put it, pieces of legislation which enshrine official versions of history. Even if that version of history is accurate, things can sometimes later on prove to be inaccurate. Now, this law is decent enough to allow exemptions for artistic purposes or scholarly research. But if scholarly research were to prove something that we don't believe now to be true, then surely this law would have to be revisited. And there's no question that the Polish people suffered unimaginably under the German occupation, as in, about 6 million of them were killed, half of those Christian Poles, half of them Jewish Poles. About 10% of Poland's population was Jewish at the outbreak of the Second World War, and people were starved to death, they were worked to death, they died from lack of fuel, shelter, clothing, lack of any medical care. So it was a really barbaric occupation. Absolutely no question about that. So why I'm against this is because it sets a dangerous precedent again, that there be more laws saying you must believe this and you have to say that, and that opinion can't be expressed, and this interpretation is illegitimate, and so on, and providing criminal sanctions for those who transgress. Now, as I say, the version of history which the Polish government wishes to promulgate is not inaccurate. But there are other people who come along saying, well, this event was also genocide, and no, you can't say this famine was mainly a natural disaster, or even partly a natural disaster, and so on. And on the other hand, a certain massacre never occurred, and things like that. And you're not allowed to insult this leader. So it's being a bit too touchy. It's leading to national chauvinism. This piece of legislation also seems to buttress this toxic myth that there can be such a thing as an innocent nation or a guilty nation. Is individuals are innocent or guilty. Organizations can be as well guilty or indeed innocent, but only insofar as the individuals who are members of it choose to participate in whatever crime it may be, or indeed to fight against some monstrous crime. So I think we must allow freedom of expression, and that includes discourse which is offensive and indeed which is misleading. And I realise there are copious amounts of bogus information on the internet, and some people who are frankly will fall for that. But no nation is entirely guiltless or totally culpable. And then that leads to racism, saying these people over here, they're bad, they're born bad because something happened several generations ago, and they must carry the can for that even today. That's like the blood libel that was used against Jewish people. However, these people over here, particularly my people, they're just born righteous, or we're the victims, and therefore we get a pass on the crimes we commit. And indeed, we must be rewarded for suffering which happened in bygone centuries and so forth. So that's another reason I oppose it. It's part of a wider trend in Poland, unfortunately, the government becoming a hyper-nationalist and, too chauvinistic. Is Poland really going to imprison people for saying things that most people find to be distasteful? So I don't want to criminalize people, even if they state fallacies about history. And yes, I am opposed to Holocaust denial laws. And I'm certainly a Holocaust affirmer. I know that it happened. That's indisputable. No reasonable person would deny that. No fair-minded person would argue against the historical record. The archives are crystal clear. Roughly 6 million Jewish people were murdered by the Third Reich and various other groups, including Polish people who were Gentiles, Soviet prisoners of war. It just depends who one chooses to put in these categories, who counts as being a Holocaust victim. All victims of the Third Reich, arguably. So it would be asinine to say that we can't revise history in the light of further evidence. Like, we believe around 6 million Jewish people were killed in the Holocaust. What if the archives were to prove it was more like 5 million or closer to 7 million? That number's not sacred. It'd be right to revise that. So let's not outlaw mistakes or even dishonesty. I appreciate this is a very sensitive issue for Polish people because they suffered such abysmal and horrendous cruelty under the heel of the Third Reich. And when they see the expression like Polish concentration camp, that upsets them, and it may lead some misinformed people to imagine the Polish government was chiefly responsible for this crime, which was not the case. But as I say, some Polish people did take part in the Holocaust of their own free will. So I dislike the wider attack on freedom of expression, and I'm perturbed by this attempt to clamp down on dissent. So this creeping authoritarianism ought to be firmly resisted.